Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dailey Blend Show with me, Reed Dailey. In episode 69, we sound off with LA-based DJ Shortee. Described as the world's premier female DJ by the Grammy Foundation, a world-renowned DJ, turntablist, and music producer, Rolling Stone magazine distinguishes her among the fader-flipping elite. Adding that, her creativity and prowess on the wheels are constantly mind-boggling. Shortee, also an instructor, record label boss, actor, voice coach, and published author. Honored as Queen of Scratch World by DJ Times, DJ Shortee has a 25-plus year career, highlighted in series of Ladies First. Her pioneering spirit, inspiring talent, and long resume of accomplishments sparks awe, gender aside. Typically, we showcase the whole interview in its entirety. This one ran a little long, so we're going to do it in two parts. We're going to do the first part this week, and then we're going to do the second part next week. It's not rocket science, people. You just download 2 episodes. Anyway, before we jump into the show, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe Dailey Blend on all major podcast platforms. Find it on social media, Twitter and Instagram. You can find me at Reed Dailey on Instagram and Twitter. And with that said, let's jump into the first part of our interview where we sound off with DJ Shortee.
So let's start. So first of all, we're here with DJ Shortee. And do you only go by DJ Shortee, or do you sometimes go by your first name, or is it really just DJ Shortee?
Either one. My real name is Shannon, and I also go by Shortee, Shortee. So either one is fine. I'm short, and my name is Shannon.
So is that how did you develop your DJ name because you're short, or was it just coincidence?
So, well, I'm a short person. Obviously, if you've ever seen me, you'll know that. But that was my nickname growing up in grade school. That's what people called me. And then when I started DJing in college, this was in 1995. And so back then there was no Serato. There was, no way. I don't even know if there were CDJs back then. If so, they were super new. But there was the only way that you could scratch your name is if it was on vinyl. And so I went through a couple name ideas, but I kept going back to Shortee. And then I realized, it's on a couple hip hop songs. I can scratch it. And so that solidified it. And this is before everyone started saying Shortee in their songs. So then once 2000 hit, everyone started saying Shortee in the songs. And I was like, man, I hit the jackpot. So that is why I landed on Shortee. But yes, nice. I am short.
Very cool. I'm just picturing you standing on the crate, or those metal crate boxes from the turntables. Those flight cases were the coolest things, and I had to have them. And then once you get them loaded with 1200, it is the heaviest damn thing to carry.
Oh, they're terrible. So. They're terrible. You're like, they're nice and protected. And they're like, wait, I got to carry this. But they make great stools. I stand on them all the time. I'm not even joking. They're my preferred thing to stand on. I'm like, whenever the setup is too tall, I'm like, do you have any flight cases? They're like, we can get milk crates, or we can build a platform. I'm like, no. Do you have flight cases for the turntables? Are perfect. Nice. So they're great. Nice. And you can make them higher or lower depending on how much height you need. Just half of it or the full case.
I can see that.
Clearly, I've done this a lot.
So walk us through. How did you start DJing? What got you into it?
So I was a drummer growing up. I started playing drums and piano when I was around 7. But drums and percussion were my main. Technically, piano is a percussion instrument, but drums and percussion were my main instruments going up through grade school and high school. I was total band geek in all the marching band, and it wasn't cool to be in the marching band where I went to school. But I loved it, and symphonic band and jazz band, and so I was total band geek. And I was into hip hop and electronic dance music. But I didn't respect the DJ as a musician because I was a classically trained musician. I could read music, and so I was like, wiki, that's so easy. Anyone can do that. I play a real instrument, because all I had seen was really simple, scratching. And I was like, they're just playing other people's music, like the snobby traditional musician's mindset basically is what I had. And then when I went to college, I was into going to raves and hip hop shows. I was also really into Fish and jam bands. I followed the Grateful Dead, which, by the way, is a parallel scene with the rave scene. Anyway, like in terms of like peace, love, unity. And so it was a very natural step into the electronic dance music scene for me from the jam band scene. So I was so again, aware of the DJ, and I enjoyed it. And I had some friends that were DJs, and I had even tried mixing at parties just for fun. And I beat matched right away. So I didn't, and I was drunk and I didn't feel challenged by it. So that made me disrespect it even more. And it was just, I was terrible mindset about DJing until one of my friends was like, I have a friend who's visiting. He's over at my place. He's scratching in my living room. You got to come check it out. And I'm like, whatever, wiki, like anyone can do that. He's like, no, come check this out. You're going to love it. So I went over and I walked in, and there was this guy, and he had dreads about shoulder length. And he was cute, and we'll get more into that later. But he had dreads about to his shoulders, and I had a dread fetish back then. And I was like, ooh, who's this guy? And he was scratching like, I had never seen anybody scratch like this before. He was doing all these syncopated rhythms and Latin rhythms and rhythms I couldn't even play on my drums. And I was like, what is that? And you're cute, but what is that? And so anyway, so that night I was playing drums in, I was in a punk rock band back then in college. And so I was playing drums in my punk rock band that night at a house party. And that guy came to the house party, and he stood behind me while I was playing my drums. And I could feel him watching me. And then at the end, he came up to me. He's like, you're a really good drummer. And I was like, you are an amazing scratch DJ. How do you do that? And he's like, well, it's a percussion instrument. You know, it's the same. I can teach you. And that was a great pickup line, because that was in 1995, and we've been together for 25 years. We got married in 2001. His name is DJ Faust. His real name is Bobby. And he taught me the basics of mixing, scratching, and beat juggling. And back then, there wasn't very many scratches out yet, because remember, this is 1995. So there was no flare, there was no crab. You know, it was just like baby, release, drag, transform, scribble. You know, there was no Autobahn or anything like that, boomerang, nothing like that. These are advanced scratches for those that don't know that I'm mentioning. So, so he taught me the basics, and the basics of beat juggling and mixing, and then we learned the rest together. So like all the new scratches we were, and I taught him a lot about electronic dance music, because he was more of a hip hop head. And so we ended up really complementing each other, in terms of our experience and expertise. And it really sort of morphed into what we are now, which is like this multi-genre hip hop, electronic dance music, DJ production couple. And we go by Urban Assault now. So as a team, so if we're playing as a team, we're Urban Assault. And we have a record label, Heavy Artillery Recordings, which is like a bass music, electronic dance music record label. So it's like drum and bass, trap, electro house, that kind of stuff. But all that started in 1995 when I saw him scratching with his cute dreads in my friend's living room. And so that's how I started. And that's the end of the story. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot more.
Did you,
but that was the beginning.
Have you thanked this friend for saying, come on over and hear this guy scratch?
Yes, many times. His name is Eric Deach. I haven't talked to him in years, but that was our mutual friend.
Nice.
But yeah, and then so that was in 1995. But when I was learning, bear in mind, I'm a traditional musician, right? So I'm used to reading music theory and stuff like that. And so when Bobby was teaching me the patterns, I wanted a way to remember them and transcribe them. So I started creating these symbols for the scratches and for the rhythms and the patterns, and then wrote it over traditional music theory. And then I would write like, you know, books of these things so I could remember all my scratch patterns. And then now fast forward to teaching, it's become a awesome teaching tool, especially teaching people who are musicians, because then it's traditional music theory is the same. It's a language. You're speaking their language. But back then, that's how I remembered my patterns. And so then in 1997, one of my friends was like really, really struggling learning the flare. And he was just really, really frustrated. And I had just learned the flare scratch. It's a type of scratch. And so I was like, oh, I just learned it. I'll teach you. And that was my first student. His name is Pete Babb. His DJ name is Enki. He lives in the Bay Area in Oakland. And little did I know at that time, he was going to quit DJing because he thought that scratching was a necessary skill for a hip hop DJ to have. And he was just struggling with it so much. And he was on the verge of quitting. And he said, had you not taught me, I taught him a couple other scratches after that too. He's like, if you hadn't taught me that, I wouldn't be DJing right now. I would have quit. So he was my first student. And then I find that teaching so early in my career, because I was only 2 years in as a DJ myself. So, but it enabled me to still have that beginner's mindset, which I feel has really served me as a teacher, because it's really hard when you get really advanced at something to go back and remember how that beginner's mindset to speak to people on their level when they're first being introduced to something. So I'm always thankful for Pete asking me to teach him that, because it forced me to start teaching back then. And then in 1999, I released the first ever DJ instructional tutorial video in the world, as far as I know, is on VHS. It's called DJ 101. It taught the basics of mixing, scratching, and beat juggling. And then we went to DVD in the year 2001, and then it created a series. And so that was actually how I started teaching. So I just told you how I started DJing and how I started teaching.
That's such a great story. And I love this quote, beginner's mindset. Like, I think that translates across, like, not just DJing and teaching, but just teaching in general and kind of becoming a master. That's such a cool thing. And in terms of the VHS, I mean, I saw that. I told you before we started recording, I was an intern at DJ Times, and I saw that video in one of the offices. That office building has so much swag of just all like music industry, and I would like go home with bags of CDs and rip like the MP3s off and then come back in the next day. So it was pretty cool. So I saw that video for sure. What was it like trying to decide, what made you want to do a DJ instructional video? Because that people weren't doing those at the time. Did you just see a void in the marketplace?
Yeah, because when I was learning, I was like, man, are there any videos that teach this? Because I love Bobby. He's amazing, but he wasn't like a teacher. He was just showing me what he knew, and then I was trying to find my own way to like, digest what he was showing me and like teach myself in a way. And I was like, why is nobody teaching this? There were no DJ schools back then. There was no YouTube. YouTube didn't exist, So, and the only way that you could see other DJs doing stuff and so that you could learn stuff is watching the DMC battle DJ videos, which is like, for those that are listening that don't know what DMC is, it's like one of the biggest DJ battles in the world. And back then it was the biggest, and they would make these VHS tapes of the battles. And so you'd be so lucky if you could get your hands on one of those VHS tapes to like see because the battle DJs were on the forefront of all the new stuff. And so you'd like want to see what they were doing. And back then it was like the Scratch Pickles and the Beat Junkies. And our crew was Third World Citizens. And so in my crew, it was Craze, DJ Craze, who's 6-time DMC champion. He won it 3 times solo, 3 times team. Clever was in our crew, Shotgun, King James, T-Rock, Faust, and myself. So we were in a DJ crew. So we were up with the DJ crews, but you couldn't, unless you were in the room with them, you couldn't see it unless it was on a VHS tape. And so, and it was like trying to figure out what they were doing by watching it. And before that, the way Bobby learned, because he's a little older than me, he's 3 years older than me. And when he started DJing, he was 13. And he would listen to records and try to figure out what Jazzy Jeff is doing on He's the DJ, I'm the Rapper, just by listening to it or like doing the transform, and he's like, how is he making that sound? And so as I was learning, I started teaching my friends, and I was like, someone needs to make a video about this. And so and at the time I was also a struggling artist, we were touring, but I was still coming up in my career. So I was like, we also have to find a way to make some extra money. So I was like, I'll make an instructional video. And so we filmed it in our living room. It was so grassroots. We borrowed someone's high-8 camera. Like this was, in the late 90s. So there was no smartphone or anything that you could film it on. And I still have it. And it's so embarrassing to watch because, but my on-camera skills were terrible. And, but it was the first ever of anyone doing that, teaching mixing, scratching, and beat juggling. There was a couple videos that taught some scratch skills, but not all the elements of DJing. And so that was the first. And then after we sold hundreds of those crusty VHS tapes. And so then that's when we refilmed the whole thing properly. I got a film person to film it and edit it at the time because I didn't know how to do it at that time. And then we made a DVD series. But it all started with the void in the market and me being like, I wish I had this. Because I wanted a structured way of learning something from someone that could actually explain and articulate things step by step. And I was like, nobody's doing it, so I need to do it. But I thoroughly enjoy it. And I used to teach martial arts. I'm a black belt. I got my black belt in high school. And I used to teach martial arts. And so that was my first teaching experience, was teaching martial arts. So I already knew certain things about how to teach and how to articulate different things step by step. And so I started using that experience and transferring it over to DJing. And I think that really served me. That and the beginner's mindset together, I think really served me. And then my passion for teaching has always been equal, if not more, than my passion for DJing. Now, as I'm older, I'm much older, because that was 25 years ago. Now, my passion is, I'm way more passionate about teaching than actually going out and DJing in clubs, because I feel like I can touch more people when I teach. Because if I teach you and then you show someone else and then the light just spreads, rather than me DJing at a club. And yes, there's one night, but it's not like they're transferring that energy somewhere else or showing other people. So it stops in the club to me, it's totally different experience, but I really like the nerdiness of teaching and just like, there's something about that process that really lights me up. And just the connection and really seeing someone, like, I love to make the crowd, go crazy at a club. And that's a great feeling. But it's more of like, it's an about me feeling, like, oh, they really like what I'm doing. And I'm creating this energy and we're all connected and that's great. But when I'm teaching someone, it's like, I totally get off at seeing that person, the light bulb go off. And it's all about them. And that, to me, I get goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps right now just thinking about it. That's a tell for my body. If I get goosebumps all over my body, I know I'm in my zone. And that's what I get when I'm teaching people. It's just like, just seeing the light bulb go off and seeing them get it, and then seeing them grow and progress and see where they take it, and then they teach other people or they DJ other places, and then the light just spreads. Actually, our mutual friend Analyze learned the flair from the DJ 101 DVD. I don't know if she told you, or it was the VHS tape, the original VHS tape. That's how she learned the flair. Before I even met her, I met her at NAMM, which is a music convention. But she learned, and so it was crazy when I first did the videos and then getting the feedback from people that I didn't know coming up. And granted, again, no YouTube, so there's no comment section or any sort of feedback. You don't know if what you're doing is doing anything until people come up to you at a show out of the blue and they're like, thank you so much. You taught me how to DJ. And that is the best feeling. So yeah, so now cool. I'm way more passionate about teaching than I am actually DJing. I'll still DJ gigs, and I especially love playing drum and bass. And of course I love scratching. Scratching is something I'll always be doing, but teaching is my jam.
Is your thing? Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about, so for your crew and just kind of being on the road, like, what was it like? Cause it must have been hard just planning and executing, being on the road, right? Like, we didn't have smartphones. Like, how did you go about either getting gigs or even going on tour, whatever form that was? Like, how did you plan that? Did you have a team? Were you working, by yourself to do a lot of these things with the different kind of promoters? How did that work, and how has that changed for you?
Oh, it's changed considerably, but back in the 90s, like, it was just like, it just started really organically. When I started, we were playing parties in my apartment to pay for rent, to raise rent money. And then people would hear, and then we'd play local. I was in college, so we play college parties. And I say we because it was myself and my husband we'd be playing. And then we did a lot of raves in that area. We were really into the rave scene. We played progressive house and breaks and techno and stuff like that, and hard house, and then eventually it evolved into drum and bass. But it was all organic, just like through the rave scene. And back then you could play, the hip hop we played was more instrumental, obscure beats and breaks, funk and stuff like that. It wasn't so it wasn't like rap is today and hip hop is today. Right. And so there was a market for that back then, and we could play at raves where we play in the hip hop room, and then we'd play the main stage in techno or something like that. And so that we got to straddle that line for a while. And then it eventually went, we were in Southwestern Virginia at that time, because I was going to college at Radford University. And then we would play the surrounding states, and eventually we moved to Atlanta. And then that's when we got in our DJ crew with the people I mentioned before. And then around that time, 1997, Faust produced Man or Myth. And Man or Myth was his first solo album that he featured myself, DJ Craze, and Shotgun on. And that was all our first time on record, his and mine. And it was actually just intended to be like this crazy mixtape, like really, really cut up though. Like any echoes you heard were done by hand on the mixer. Like you'd raise the volume and then you'd lower it a little and you'd lower a little. It's all done with scratching. Any drums would be scratched in by hand, and it was made on a Yamaha 8-track. We weren't producing on computers, and it was just two turntables and a Yamaha 8-track and a beat up MTX DJ mixer. And this was intended to be like a cool, really extravagant kind of mixtape in a way, but like all pieced together, puzzle piece. And Dave, I can't remember his name. Dave Tompkins was a writer. I don't remember what. I think he wrote for Herb. Remember Herb magazine? He wrote for a bunch of magazines, but he put this mixtape on his answering machine. And yes, this was in the 90s. So we had answering machines back then with the cassette tape in there. And he put it as his message when someone called. That's what they'd hear, to leave a message. And he was a writer. He wrote for magazines like Herb. He might have even written for DJ Times. But then Dave Paul from Bomb Records called him about, something about writing or something, heard the message on the answering machine, and then was like, what is that? I want to sign it. I want to put it out on my label. And that is how Faust got the record deal with Bomb Records. And then that was also the first Turntablist album, because it's a Turntablist album, meaning it's produced solely from scratching things in, right? So it's not like sequenced or produced in like a computer or anything like that. It's all by hand. And so it was the first Turntablist album ever in history that was released on Bomb Records. And then after that, we released the Fathomless EP with Craze, myself and Faust. It was a joint EP. It was experimental. And then on that, it was a Turntablist EP, but we also used a SP1200 on that as a drum machine, a classic hip hop drum machine. And then I released my first solo album, The Dreamer, which is the first and only that I know of Turntablist album by a female. And so I say all this to answer your question about touring, because that's how we really got out. We were doing local states around Atlanta. We lived in Atlanta at the time, so we were doing Tennessee and Florida and the Carolinas and stuff like that. But we didn't get. And I'm from the DC, Baltimore area, so we would go up there a lot and DJ. But it was just like that area on the East Coast. Once in a while, New York. And we had a booking agent that was helping us get those bookings, but most of it was just word of mouth, us, and email. Thank goodness email existed back then, so we could email. But it wasn't until the album started coming out that's when we were able to broaden our scope as performers and get out of our region of that East Coast, mostly Southeast area. And our first tour was a U.S. tour. It was the Fathomless tour for that EP. because Bobby toured for Man or Myth, but I didn't go on that tour with him. So my first tour was on the Fathomless tour. And so we toured the US and then we toured Europe. We did the European tour. And so the production was the conduit to making those connections back then. Because again, no social media. So you needed to do something to get people's attention. And print magazines were where it was at. So we really hammered getting reviews, making relationships with writers. Like I was Jim Tremaine from DJ Times, Dave Tompkins from Herb Magazine. Actually, Pete Babb, the guy that I talked about, that was my friend that I taught him how to flare. He was also a writer. He wrote for Herb and Vice. So we had a lot of friends we befriended, not, organically, not like just being like weird about it, like only wanting to use them. We organically befriended writers as our friends. And then it was like a collaboration. They needed to write for their magazines. We kept creating content for them to write about, tours or events or productions or whatever. And that is how we were able to create a healthy touring career. So yes, we had an agent, but that is not how we got all our bookings. How we got our bookings was making content in the way that you make content in the 90s and networking in the way that you network in the 90s, which is making friends with writers so that they can, because that's free advertising. Back then we were broke. So it wasn't like we were putting out ads in Herb Magazine, but we would get that article or that review or whatever. And that was money. And that's how we toured back then. But now it's of course, so totally different. It's a lot easier to reach people. But back then you had to be really resourceful.
Huh. I was in Atlanta at the same time you guys were. And I was going to like stores like Wish. It was up in the mall, but it was up in the mall. So it's down in Little Fives now.
Little Five Points.
Up in, before though, the original Wish, it was called something else. It was up in, not Norcross, but further north. And then it moved down to that killer, store it's in right now. But I would buy like all the, I was a couple years younger and I was seeing all like the rave flyers. I was like, oh, I can't wait to go to one of these things. That was like, it was the coolest thing to just see, be able to like touch a flyer. And you're just like, oh my God, I feel so connected to this industry and I'm only holding a flyer. But yeah, it was cool to see kind of Atlanta sort of go into the like kind of interesting where it was a cross between jam band people, hip hop and like rave culture, or at least that's my perception.
Little Five Points. Yeah, Little Five Points was awesome too. When they moved Wish to Little Five Points, they had satellite records underneath the store in the basement. Tommy Sunshine worked there. Yep. Tommy Sunshine worked there. And so that's where we got tons of that's where I got a lot of my favorite records from back then. And then also Rewind Records opened up around the block.
The corner.
All the record stores were there. Wax and Fax was there, and that was like a Dusty Grooves kind of place where you get your funk and your soul and your rare grooves. But Rewind Records was around the corner, and that I worked at Rewind Records, so that was like the typical DJ thing to do, was to work at a record store. And I sold a ton of my instructional DVDs there. But that was the other thing, going around what you were talking about, trying to get gigs and stuff, and how we did that. Also selling a product like an instructional DVD or even CDs in general, like mixtapes or whatever. And when I say mixtapes, I mean actual mixtapes. And then mixed CDs eventually. But we would go around to all the record stores. We would go to Satellite, of course, Rewind, where I worked. And peddle my videos and our CDs to make money. So, but that also helped with bookings, because whenever we were in another city, we'd be like, where are the record stores? And then we go and we peddle our wares and then they'd pick them up and they'd carry them. And whether it was a mix CD or an instructional video, people would, purchase them, and then they'd hear about us, and then we get more bookings in that area. You know what I'm saying? So that was another way to get bookings, to physically go in, meet, create relationships with the people at the record store so that they reorder also. And then, you make some money. It wasn't like we were getting rich off it, but, you make a little money, but it was ultimately about that awareness and spreading your name around so that you can create more awareness to, blow up a bit bigger.
Yeah. You bring up Satellite Records. So I remember going to Satellite Records. So I had to borrow my parents' car to drive down there. and like I had no money, so I'd buy like one record at a time. You know, it was like a 30-minute, 40-minute drive, and they get it. But I remember like the internet was starting to happen, and they had a really bad website, but they had a store in Boston, Atlanta, and New York. I was like, I can't wait to go to all the stores. And I ended up going to college in New York City or in the surrounding borough. And I would shop at Satellite. I was like, all right, I've been to 2 out of the 3. Can't wait to get up to Boston. And then like the record, like physical vinyl, like ended when I was in college. It just like that store closed. I was like, no, this is such a great experience. So anyway, but yeah. So how did you go from being in Atlanta and kind of, you know, being in a group with Craze and Clever, et cetera? Like, because you're on the West Coast now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I live in LA now. So how did I go from Atlanta?
Yeah.
So we lived in Atlanta for 7 years. I should preface this by saying both of us are originally from the DC, Baltimore, Northern Virginia area. So we had a lot of connections up there. And then we moved to Atlanta because I transferred from Radford University to the Art Institute of Atlanta, which is an art school. And that's where I got my degree in 3D animation and graphic design. And we lived there for 7 years. And it was a really rich time in both of our careers where we were growing a lot. We were meeting tons of people. We were in our DJ crew. That crew, I'm so grateful for the chance to be in the crew with Craze and Clever and Faust and stuff, because number one, I was the only girl and I was the youngest DJ experience-wise, not age-wise. So it was really hard. Because they wouldn't let me be the token female. And so it was a lot of tough love. And like, I had to work my ass off, but it's because of that time in my life. And Atlanta was a great city to be able to do that because it wasn't too big of a pond, especially back then, you know? And so, but it had a great thriving scene. And so I worked my ass off and I learned, like, you know, Craze is like battling in DMCs at the time. He hadn't won yet. And so like he's putting together his routines, and then I would learn as he's doing it. He'd show me what he's doing. Same with Clever and of course Faust and my other crewmates. So I learned so much back then, and I had to work really hard. And that is, I feel like what has given me sustainability today, that work ethic, and also just like not being able to rest on my laurels, not being able to just look cute behind the decks and that be it, you know, like I had to come correct with skills. And so that was a really important time in my life that I'm super grateful for. I'm super grateful for the males that taught me, because a lot of dudes would not teach a female because they're like, no, this is my thing. Go like put on your makeup or play with dolls or, you know, whatever. Like, especially back then, technology is intimidating and stuff like that. So I was really, really fortunate to have such a supportive boyfriend who wanted to collaborate with me musically and show me stuff. And then also my crewmates. But at the same time, they weren't letting me just get a free ride. Like I had to work. And so that was around that time in Atlanta. And so I really, really am grateful also for my time in Atlanta, because it was one of those things that was not such a big of a pond, but we could, you know, grow our careers. It was still a metropolitan city, right? And so at around 7 years, to answer your question, we became a big fish in a small pond. And we knew that we had to, in order to grow any further at that time, because Atlanta back then was not, and this is like 2004, it wasn't what it is now, right? And so back then, like we had to broaden our scope. So it was either New York or LA. And there's 2 reasons why we chose LA. I love New York, but Bobby doesn't like the cold. He's Puerto Rican. I'm not sure if that's why he doesn't like the cold, but he doesn't like the cold. So that was already, New York was out of the question. But then also one of our good friends is DJ Z-Trip. He's a really dope open format DJ, turntablist. He's also the DJ for LL Cool J now. But anyway, DJ Z-Trip, and his name is Zach, and we played with him often and stuff, but he had just moved to LA like a year prior, a couple years prior, and he was saying like, you guys got to move out here. You guys got to move out here. By the way, he also DJ'd our wedding. He scratched me down the aisle. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Like he played like he scratched me down the aisle with like the traditional wedding song. And then at the end on the walk out, and he was lined up with his turntables and the groomsmen. He was a groomsman too, but it was all like a presentation. And then on the way out, he put a Timbaland beat over the traditional wedding song, made like a funky wedding song and scratched us out. And then he DJ'd the reception. He had my grandma dancing to Doing the Butt. We did the first scratch before the first dance. He called us up to scratch. But anyway, he was a good friend. And so he just kept telling us, you got to move out here. You got to move out here. So then we eventually moved out to LA with our cats. We had 2 cats at the time in a car and our U-Haul, drove across the country. And we had tried to move out to LA a lot of times, but financially we weren't, like, anytime we made up enough money to make that big move, something would happen, you know. And again, DJing was our living. We didn't have side jobs like this. We were all in. So it's like a roller coaster, you know. It's a struggle being a struggling artist at that time. And so I got this really dope opportunity to do a 50-city tour for Playboy for their 50th anniversary tour. I was their DJ. I was the most clothed female at the events. I was never a playmate. But I was their DJ on this tour. And it was a great opportunity for me to first tour the country on a bus. That was amazing. And tour all 50 states and play this amazing tour, but then also make enough money. And that's how we moved in a short amount of time. It was a 5-month tour. And then right after that, and we made connections because Playboy, of course, is based out in LA. And so that also helped be a conduit to our move. And that's how we moved out here. We made enough money on that tour, and we've lived here since the October 2004. And we've actually lived here longer than we've lived anywhere else in our lives, either of us. So it's really weird. Like as you get older and you start to see, like, wow, I've lived here for 16 years and I've never lived anywhere that long. Like, I don't know about you. When I grew up, I bounced around a lot. So my parents were divorced and we lived in a lot of different areas, and same with my husband. So, so to be in one place for this long is crazy. And so we consider LA our home, but we're still East Coasters at heart too. So we got the best of both worlds.
I'm slightly different, East Coast for kind of up and down, but now I live in Chicago, so I feel nice. Somewhat of your feelings there. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for tuning into part 1 of the DJ Shortee Sound Off interview. We will have part 2 next week. I will include all of DJ Shortee's social links in the post on daileyblend.com, also in the show notes. And as always, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe Dailey Blend on all major podcast platforms. That's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Like, follow, subscribe on Instagram and Twitter. And check me out on Instagram and Twitter. That's at ReedDailey, ReedDailey. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode.